In mid-December 1944, near Stavelot, Belgium, German forces were in the midst of preparing for one of their final decisive offensives on the Western Front, the Ardennes Offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge. These days became legendary, not only because of the fierce clashes between German tanks and American troops, but also due to a decisive factor often overlooked: fuel. In this picture, the symbol of Germany's failure was the Tiger II and Panther tanks standing motionless on snow-covered roads, sophisticated war machines rendered useless by empty fuel tanks. One eyewitness to this scene was Obersturmführer Joachim Peiper, commander of the KF Grouper Peiper Armored Group in the 1st SS Panzer Division. Through his command binoculars, Peiper saw convoys of American trucks stretching along distant roads, consuming more fuel each hour than the entire German column he commanded possessed. The scent of gasoline from nearby enormous fuel depots only deepened his frustration. The largest fuel depot in Belgium, containing 2.2 million gallons, was just a few kilometers from his vehicles, but completely out of reach. In post-war testimony at the Dachau trials, Peiper recalled, "We could smell the gasoline. The great fuel depot was right before our eyes, yet we could not touch it." His vehicles became monuments to our failure, perfectly engineered machines, finely crafted, but powerless due to lack of fuel. Meanwhile, the Americans seemed to have an inexhaustible energy supply, capable of burning over 1 million gallons of gasoline merely to prevent the Germans from capturing it. The fuel disparity between the two sides was not just a tactical problem, it was the strategic essence of Germany's defeat. Wehrmacht documents in the Bundesarchiv note that from 1941, Germany produced about 5.7 million tons of oil per year, including synthetic gasoline from coal. In contrast, the United States alone produced 180 million tons, with an additional 300 million tons from Allied sources, creating a nearly 100.1 disparity. This was a fundamental strategic disadvantage that no tactic or personal skill could overcome. To carry out the Ardennes Offensive, Hitler promised Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt around 5 million gallons of fuel. The Wehrmacht managed to stock nearly that amount, but transportation issues reduced the actual fuel available to only 3.17 million gallons when the offensive began on December 16, 1944. Even this quantity was enough for only 6 days of operations, and command calculations indicated they could cover only 1/3 to 1/2 of the distance to Antwerp under combat conditions. The war diary of Captain Joachim Dietrich, logistics officer of the 2nd Panzer Division, recorded an impossible calculation. Each vehicle had enough fuel for only 9,100 miles, while the minimum distance to Antwerp was 125 miles, and fuel consumption in combat would double. German command ordered, "Capture American fuel depots to continue the offensive." The entire Ardennes campaign, quite literally, depended on seizing fuel from the enemy. While German tanks waited for fuel that never arrived, the Americans created one of the greatest logistics systems in military history. The Red Ball Express, operating from August 25 to November 16, 1944, transported 12,500 tons of supplies daily along dedicated highways from the Normandy beaches to the front lines. Second Lieutenant Charles Woe of the 3632nd Truck Unit, a main component of the Red Ball Express, recorded that his company could move up to 50,000 gallons of gasoline on a good day, while simply sustaining operations consumed 300,000 gallons daily, more than the entire fuel Germany had for combat. American logistical superiority was further demonstrated by Operation Pluto, the undersea pipeline system supplying fuel from Britain. Despite initial difficulties, by December 1944, the system reached nearly 1 million gallons per day, with a single pipeline delivering more fuel daily than Germany's entire synthetic gasoline industry. Expanded across Europe, the pipelines solved logistical problems. Every major depot could receive unlimited fuel regardless of weather or enemy actions. In Belgium, the Spar depot held 226,000 gallons, and Stavelot depot 115,000 gallons, over 3.3 million gallons in total, more than the entire German allotment for the Ardennes Offensive. According to Sergeant James Morrison of the 25th Quartermaster Corps, these depots were loaded with trucks, jerry cans, and underground storage tanks, and even received an additional 200,000 gallons from headquarters. Rather than storing it, the Americans burned 124,000 gallons of gasoline because they couldn't transport it fast enough, a waste Germany could only dream of. Meanwhile, German tanks, designed for superior combat, Tiger II with a 700-horsepower engine, consumed fuel voraciously, 2.75 gallons per mile on roads and 5.5 gallons per mile in rough terrain. This left an actual combat range of only about 60 miles before refueling was necessary. The Panther, though more efficient, managed only 0.5 miles per gallon in combat conditions, meaning the entire Panther force required 15,000 gallons just to move 30 miles under enemy fire. These German machines, technically perfect, became monuments of impotence exemplified by King Tiger 332, fully armed with engine and armor intact, yet unable to move due to lack of fuel. Piper and other commanders understood that the Ardennes offensive would fail before the first shot was fired, not because of the Americans, but because of the Wehrmacht's thirst for fuel. This disaster was not merely a technical or minor logistical issue, but a manifestation of the strategic difference between two economies and industrial systems. The U.S. measured fuel in tankers, Germany in jerry cans, and this gap determined the campaign's outcome. The Wehrmacht brought experienced troops and the strongest tanks to the Ardennes, but they challenged mathematics with willpower and were defeated by absence, the absence of gasoline. The Ardennes offensive also reflects a broader lesson of modern warfare. Regardless of skill, bravery, or tactical ingenuity, without fuel and logistics, war machines are powerless. Germany relied excessively on a strategy of stealing enemy fuel to maintain momentum. But the U.S., with superior logistics, pipelines, enormous depots, and continuous transportation, turned war into a contest of industry and energy, where victory belonged to the side controlling gasoline and oil. As Piper recalled, standing a few kilometers from the American depots, "We knew we were about to fail. Our vehicles, perfect and powerful, became monuments to fuel poverty. We could not move, could not fight. The Americans could burn millions of gallons of gasoline without thought, while we had to count every drop for every mile we traveled. While the Wehrmacht struggled with a fuel crisis and sophisticated yet powerless war machines, the U.S. military established a logistics system beyond anything the Germans could imagine. In fact, the success of American forces in the Ardennes did not stem from individual combat skill or tank strength, but from the ability to maintain a continuous supply of fuel and provisions. One of the most remarkable achievements was the Red Ball Express, a dedicated truck transportation system operating from August to November 1944. Established to sustain the advance from Normandy to the front lines, the Red Ball Express transported up to 12,500 tons of supplies daily along a network of highways reserved exclusively for the military. This network not only kept combat units well supplied, but also minimized risks from sabotage and German air attacks. Notably, the Red Ball Express was largely staffed by African-American truck units, including Second Lieutenant Charles Woe of the 3632 Quartermaster Truck Company. He recorded that his company could move up to 50,000 gallons of fuel on a good day, while simply sustaining operations consumed 300,000 gallons daily, more than the entire fuel Germany had for the Ardennes campaign. On one occasion, a driver spilled 50 gallons of gasoline. His colleagues shrugged. "That's why we carry extra reserves. We don't count every gallon, we count tankers." This remark reflects a fundamental difference in fuel management philosophy. The U.S. measured energy in tankers, Germany in jerry cans. Beyond trucks, the Americans also implemented Operation Pluto, an undersea pipeline system from Britain to supply fuel to troops on the continent. Initially plagued by technical difficulties, by December 1944, Pluto was nearing a capacity of 1 million gallons per day, far exceeding Germany's entire synthetic gasoline production. Pluto and the pipelines extending throughout Belgium and France created a fuel circulatory system. Our main depots connected like veins, transporting gasoline from ports and refineries directly to the front lines, regardless of weather or German operations. The Spar depot held 226,000 gallons, and Stavelot depot 1,115,000 gallons, a total exceeding 3.3 million gallons, far more than the entire fuel allotment the Wehrmacht had for the Ardennes. At the depots, fuel was stored in trucks, underground tanks, and jerry cans, and was continuously replenished daily. The American transportation and management system created such abundance that officers sometimes had to burn gasoline because they could not move or store it in time, about 124,000 gallons destroyed in a single instance. This logistical superiority allowed American units to use fuel freely and strategically. Sherman tanks and motor vehicles could keep engines running in freezing conditions. Jeeps could travel dozens of meters instead of soldiers walking. Generators ran continuously to provide lighting, projection for films, or even coffee for troops. Private First Class Anthony Caruso of the 3915 Quartermaster Gas Supply Company recalled that they often replaced fuel after 3 days, discarding old gasoline, leaving German observers nearly in disbelief. A German sergeant once tried to use discarded fuel in his water can, only to be laughed at. "You're mocking Germany's fuel starvation." Importantly, the Americans did not rely solely on vehicles and pipelines. They integrated fuel into an industrialized war system. Each depot was connected, each pipeline and convoy meticulously planned, ensuring that every unit always had fuel reserves. During the Ardennes campaign, these depots could have supplied months of operations for the entire German force if captured. Yet Germany could not access them because the Americans had moved or destroyed part of the reserve stock. Unlike Germany, the U.S. did not use fuel only for movement. It was a strategic weapon. Continuous supply enabled Patton and other units to advance tens of miles in freezing weather, change marching directions quickly, and maintain mobility superiority. When German tanks stalled due to empty fuel tanks, American units continued through the Ardennes unhindered. A notable example was the deployment of engineering teams to build temporary bridges, demolish old ones, and manage roadways, using thousands of gallons of gasoline to operate machinery. Tasks that would have taken Germans days to complete manually were finished in hours with mechanized machines powered by abundant fuel. This not only maintained momentum, but also forced Germans to expend fuel as they searched for alternative routes. During the Ardennes, the Americans continued expanding pipelines and fuel depots closer to the front. By late December 1944, they could pump 100,000 gallons of gasoline daily to points nearest to German lines. This meant that every subsequent American operation was assured fuel, while Germany continued to face a crisis. This logistical superiority explains why the U.S. could consume more fuel than Germany possessed while still maintaining reserves, whereas the Wehrmacht was constrained to the point where every mile had to be carefully calculated. The Red Ball Express, Pluto pipelines, and fuel depots transformed the U.S. into an almost invincible energy force, where even the most advanced German tactics and tanks could not overcome the sheer abundance of fuel. During the Ardennes Offensive, what happened to the German mechanized forces vividly demonstrated the absolute importance of fuel in modern warfare. Tiger the Seku and Panther tanks, once considered some of the most sophisticated war machines, quickly became immobile blocks of steel, stranded helplessly on snow-covered roads, having run out of fuel before reaching their strategic targets. On December 17, 1944, the KF Grouper Piper Armored Group advanced near the Spar fuel depot, which held over 2.2 million gallons of gasoline. but the entire column was stalled due to empty fuel tanks. Of 117 tanks, 6 Tiger IIs, 13 Panthers, and numerous other armored vehicles were unable to move, despite being mechanically sound and fully armed. Piper recalled, "We were defeated by the absence of fuel, not by American firepower. We had to abandon the Wehrmacht's finest machines because their tanks were empty. The fuel crisis forced Germany to take desperate measures to maintain the offensive, including attacking American fuel depots. At Bulge, a team from Piper's group discovered 50,000 gallons of lightly guarded American gasoline. German soldiers captured the depot and filled their tanks and reserve containers, yet even this fuel was sufficient for only a few miles, far short of the distance needed to execute the campaign as planned. Vehicles like the Panther required 15,000 gallons just to travel 30 miles under enemy fire, while the entire German fuel supply for Piper AS column totaled only 180,000 gallons, enough for a single engagement, leaving nothing for subsequent operations. The fuel shortage also contributed to acts of brutality by German soldiers, exemplified by the Malmedy massacre on December 17, 1944. In an effort to maintain the pace of advance and conserve fuel, Piper ordered the execution of 84 American prisoners from the 285th Reconnaissance Battalion. Survivor Technical Sergeant William recalled that the Germans constantly checked the time and argued about fuel consumption, killing prisoners to avoid slowing their advance, a situation both brutal and desperate. While Germany faltered due to fuel shortages, the Americans continued to display logistical superiority. Gasoline depots provided ample energy for Sherman tanks, vehicles, and jeeps. American vehicles could operate continuously in freezing weather, power generators, run projectors, provide heating for troops, or simply move supplies across several blocks instead of marching. Private First Class Anthony Caruso witnessed U.S. soldiers discarding hundreds of gallons of old fuel to replace it with fresh gasoline, leaving German troops almost in disbelief. The U.S. pipeline and depot system, combined with the Red Ball Express, allowed Patton to move 3 divisions over more than 100 miles in freezing conditions, consuming 800,000 gallons of gasoline in 72 hours. Nearly equal to the entire fuel allotment Germany received for the Ardennes Offensive. Meanwhile, German units sat idle, counting every gallon, while American forces operated without fuel worries, highlighting the decisive gap in logistics between the two sides. Even when Germany attempted aerial fuel resupply, the effort ended in disaster. On December 22nd, the Luftwaffe dispatched 35 U-52 transport aircraft to refuel Piper's column, but only 10 reached the correct locations, delivering 1,100 gallons, enough for only 10 tanks to move a few dozen meters. The remainder was lost due to crashes or captured by the Americans, emphasizing that the German Air Force could no longer rescue the column from the fuel crisis. By December 24th, Piper's column consisted solely of immobile vehicles, and he was forced to abandon 135 pieces of equipment, including Tiger IIs, Panthers, and other armored vehicles. German forces withdrew, leaving behind perfect machines rendered useless by lack of fuel. Post-war Wehrmacht reports noted that around 400 tanks and self-propelled guns were abandoned due to empty fuel tanks, while American forces maintained abundant gasoline reserves. The fuel shortage also sapped German morale. When presented with the Americans' fuel stockpiles, Major Heinrich Gersel of the 2nd SS Division refused to believe it until shown the actual invoices. If you can supply 100,000 gallons of fuel to a single division, why should we even fight? We are foot soldiers in empty tanks. This despair shows that the Ardennes failure was not due to tactics or courage, but to the lack of fuel and logistics. Furthermore, Germany's loss of mobility allowed the Americans to conduct effective relief and counteroffensive operations. At Bastogne, U.S. units under siege never ran out of fuel. C-47 transports delivered 5,000 gallons in drop tanks, and German observers in the woods saw American tanks and troops consistently fueled, completely in contrast to the Wehrmacht ES exhaustion. A striking example was King Tiger 332, a 68-ton war machine found with an empty fuel tank, a perfect engine, and fully armed weapons, yet unable to move. Tank Commander Oberstführer Kurt Knipl wrote in his final report, "We were defeated by absence, the absence of fuel, which the Americans had in unlimited quantities. Our entire perfectly equipped formation became useless simply due to lack of gasoline. In the final days of the offensive, German tanks were abandoned, self-propelled guns pushed into ditches, and armored vehicles left in the road, all monuments to fuel poverty. Meanwhile, American units continued moving, deploying tanks, trucks, and mechanized equipment normally, proving that victory in the Ardennes was determined by fuel, not troops or tactics." The Battle of the Ardennes became a painful lesson for Germany and the world about industrialized warfare. The Wehrmacht had 250,000 troops, 1,400 tanks and self-propelled guns, and 2,600 artillery pieces, but all were rendered ineffective by lack of energy. In contrast, the U.S., thanks to superior logistics, could consume 50 million gallons of gasoline over the course of the battle, more than Germany possessed nationwide, and still retain substantial reserves after the Ardennes ended. This fundamental difference, one side measuring fuel by tankers, the other by jerry cans, demonstrates that the Ardennes was decided not by military skill or courage, but by a confrontation between industrial energy power and fuel scarcity. The end result was German tanks immobilized, soldiers marching in freezing conditions while American forces maintained constant mobility and dominance. Ardennes confirmed a new truth of modern warfare. Where there is fuel, there is victory. Without fuel, even the most perfect war machines are nothing more than useless steel monuments. Germany's defeat was not due to incompetence, but because it could not compete with America's industrial strength and abundant energy, a lesson future mechanized campaigns would have to heed. The Ardennes Offensive, also known as the Battle of the Bulge, was not merely a confrontation between ground forces, it was a clash between industrial capacity and energy supply. When sophisticated German machines like the Tiger II and Panther ground to a halt simply because their fuel tanks were empty, the military world recognized that victory in modern warfare depends not only on courageous soldiers or advanced tanks, but also on superior logistics and abundant energy. The first lesson from Ardennes is to never launch a mechanized campaign beyond your fuel supply capacity. The Wehrmacht assembled 250,000 troops, 1,400 tanks, and 2,600 artillery pieces, but was allotted only 3.17 million gallons of gasoline, enough for 6 days of mechanized operations. Each Tiger II consumed 2.75 gallons per mile on roads and 5.5 gallons per mile off-road. The result? Many vehicles were left fully intact but powerless, proving that no tactics or bravery could compensate for fuel shortages and that offensive plans must always align with realistic logistical capabilities. The second lesson is that relying on capturing enemy fuel depots cannot make up for shortages. Germany was ordered to seize U.S. fuel depots, yet Spar and Stavelot held more than 3.3 million gallons, far exceeding all the fuel available to the Wehrmacht for Ardennes. Even capturing a small portion, such as 50,000 gallons at Bulge, was insufficient to continue the campaign. In contrast, the U.S. could routinely refuel its mechanized divisions, maintain continuous combat capability, and deploy tanks at will. Ardennes demonstrated that modern warfare cannot rely on seizing enemy fuel. Only abundant internal resources can secure victory. Third, mechanization and logistics are inseparable. Tanks and self-propelled guns are useful only when powered. The Americans deployed thousands of kilometers of fuel pipelines, combined with the Red Ball Express and fuel depots, creating a continuous, efficient, nearly limitless energy network. This allowed Patton to move 3 divisions over 100 miles in 72 hours, while the Germans were stalled, forced to detour and waste hours conserving fuel. American logistics became a decisive weapon, enabling constant mobility and even breaking through defensive positions. Fourth, Ardennes revealed the destructive power of industrial warfare against an energy-poor opponent. The Ardennes Offensive was not defeated by American artillery or Sherman tanks, but by fuel scarcity and mechanized impotence. German officers later recalled, "The Americans didn't fight us. They drowned us in gasoline." Thousands of vehicles were abandoned. Tiger IIs and Panthers became useless steel monuments, clearly showing that energy supply, not just military skill, determines victory in modern warfare. Fifth, the lessons extend to troop morale and psychological strategy. The German forces, despite courage and discipline, had to witness their opponents moving continuously without ever lacking fuel. Logistical superiority sapped German morale, leaving soldiers frustrated, powerless, and vulnerable to American strategic decisions. In contrast, U.S. troops could maneuver freely, maintain high operational tempo, and exploit every tactical opportunity, all thanks to abundant and reliable fuel. Sixth, modern warfare is a contest of industrial production capacity. The U.S. could consume millions of gallons of gasoline daily, while Germany produced only around 40,000 gallons per day at the time of Ardennes. Refineries in Texas and Louisiana produced more gasoline than all of Germany's synthetic fuel output. In each engagement, the Americans could use 5 million gallons to undermine German fuel production, while Germany could recover only tens of thousands of gallons. This discrepancy determined victory not on the battlefield, but in refineries and oil fields. Finally, Ardennes set a new standard for modern mechanized warfare. Fuel determines everything. All sophisticated machines, elite troops, and perfect tactics are meaningless without energy. This changed how the U.S. planned future campaigns. Every military operation prioritized logistics, pipelines, depots, and continuous resupply. In subsequent campaigns, from Europe to the Pacific, fuel became a critical lifeline, a direct lesson drawn from Germany's Ardennes failure. Ardennes also left a lasting legacy for militaries worldwide. Mechanized campaigns must always account for fuel supply. Tactics cannot exceed logistical capacity, and energy becomes the ultimate strategic asset. While Germany failed due to empty tanks and mechanized impotence, the U.S. demonstrated that abundant energy embodies comprehensive power, where industry, logistics, and strategy are inseparably linked and determine the outcome of war. The Ardennes ended with images of abandoned German tanks, perfect engines immobile, while American Shermans continued rolling, engines roaring, and troops constantly maneuvering. The outcome was not merely a military victory, but a symbol of industrial and logistical superiority, where gasoline and oil determined the fate of the campaign. Ultimately, the Battle of the Bulge was decided in the refineries of Texas and Oklahoma, not in the forests of the Ardennes. From Ardennes, the future of mechanized warfare became clear. Whoever controls energy controls the battlefield. The Wehrmacht fought with skill and courage, but they could not compete with America's virtually unlimited fuel supply, a reality that determined the campaign's fate and reshaped the world's understanding of modern warfare.